So as the budget debate continues inside the House of Commons, let's go outside to the foyer and talk more about the cost of living with members of Parliament. Rachel Bendayan is Parliamentary Secretary to the Tourism Minister. Adam Chambers is Conservative Critic for National Revenue. And Peter Julian is the NDP House Leader. Welcome to all three of you.
Good to be with you.
Thanks.
Ms. Bendayan, let's start with the planned increase to the GST credit. We're told a qualifying family of four will see an average one-time payment of $467. The numbers are, of course, going to vary depending on family size, but even with inflation falling, inflation does remain above 5%. Food inflation is still above 10%. So why is this one-time boost going to be enough for people who are struggling to buy their groceries?
Well, thanks for the question, Andrew. I wouldn't say that it's enough. I would say that it's important support. And we've seen the Conservatives already indicate that they're going to vote against the budget, despite the fact that they've raised in the House that Canadians need support. They consistently vote against those supports when we propose them. What we've done with the grocery rebate is identify a targeted measure that won't add fuel on the inflationary fire. You pointed out yourself that inflation is, the reason why Canadians are having difficulty making ends meet, and so we wanted to make sure that any supports would not exacerbate the situation. Experts have looked at this and they said this is a targeted measure that will not increase inflation, and that's something that we were very concerned about. It's also the reason why we continue to support Canadians through other targeted measures, such as the enhanced workers benefit, which provides additional funds to hardworking Canadians, because if you're working a 9-to-5 job, you shouldn't have to worry about putting a roof over your head or putting food on the table.
Okay, I do want to turn to you mentioned the Conservatives, so I do want to, in the time we have, turn to Mr. Chambers on this, because your leader has been calling this budget, in his words, it's a $43 billion bonanza of new inflation. So I'd just like to know from you, what are the specific measures in this budget leading Conservatives to say that it's going to be fueling the cost of living going forward?
So it's the entire budget together as a whole. So it's $43 billion in net new spending, but it's actually $67 billion in gross new spending. So it's the fact that there's a lack of prioritization. It's not that we shouldn't be helping individuals, and we absolutely believe that as a party. In fact, it was the Conservative Party, along with the other parties, who agreed to double the GST credit in the fall. It's the fact that the government has shown no real ability to prioritize its spending. Most economists leading into this budget said, look, any additional deficits are going to make inflation worse. That's going to hurt the affordability issue. Conservatives also asked, look, we're in a recession. This is confirmed now by the government in its budget yesterday. One thing you don't want to do is increase taxes increase the carbon tax.
Okay, but we did hear the finance minister today, Chrystia Freeland, did cite former Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz, saying that he thinks that if you're investing in increasing Canada's economic capacity, that might actually serve to fight back inflation instead of increasing it. So I guess, Mr. Chambers, I'll just put to you again, can you point to, I know you're talking about the overall spending picture, but are there more specific things in this budget that are going to directly raise the cost of living?
Well, look, the government's still planning to spend almost $20 billion a year on consultants and outsourced contracts. So that's something that we obviously should be cutting significantly back on. The government says they're going to save, $1 billion, $1.5 billion a year for 7 years on that measure. That's like a far cry from what you need to do in terms of reining in spending. So that would be one example. Yes, Stephen Poloz says increasing capacity is important. He also said the increased spending from last year's budget has made inflation worse.
Okay, Mr. Julian, your leader, Jagmeet Singh, has been touting the GST credit boost and the extra spending on dental care in this budget. But he also says the housing crisis hasn't gone away. Employment insurance still needs a lot of attention. So why are these measures in the budget on affordability enough for the NDP to vote in favor?
Well, because these are very significant things that it took 7.5 years for Liberals to actually put into place. The NDP's role in this minority parliament is to get things done for people. I can tell you in Westminster Burnaby that there are tens of thousands of family members that don't have access to dental care. Dental care is not just a cost or affordability issue. It's also an issue of health, and the fact that so many Canadians can't get dental care now often puts a huge weight on our healthcare system. So these are all things that should have been done years ago, and Tommy Douglas always envisaged that dental care would be part of a universal healthcare system. We now are taking the most significant step we've taken in half a century to expand our healthcare system, and that makes a difference for families who can't afford to go to a dentist. The NDP's grocery rebate is also something that will provide supports, but we're pressing the government as well on the issue of the Competition Bureau being enhanced. We've seen greedflation. We've seen this, and Canadians have been galvanized by some of the hearings, which I've seen questioning the grocery chain CEOs, these mega empires that have been artificially bringing up the prices and gouging Canadians. And neither Conservatives or Liberals seem willing to take on these big companies that are gouging consumers because we don't have in place Competition Bureau legislation that actually stops them from doing that.
Okay,
so this is part of what the NDP plan is, to actually provide supports for working families across the country that are struggling.
Okay, I do want to return to dental care, though, and Ms. Bendayan, I'm going to turn to you. The Quebec government is already saying it wants to opt out of the new Canadian dental care plan and essentially instead receive potentially up to $3 billion over the next 5 years. If that happens, if Quebec opts out, are you concerned potentially about other provinces looking for the same deal, and how would that affect this plan?
Look, I'm not going to speculate on what will or won't happen. Quebec came out just a few hours ago, and we'll sit down and negotiate with Quebec, see what it is that they would like to do. But our priority is to give Quebecers and all Canadians that dental support, and that's absolutely what we've put out in our budget and what we intend to do. But I would like to respond to my Conservative colleague, because we continue to have the lowest deficit here in Canada among all G7 countries, and our deficit decreased from last year to this year and will continue to decrease consistently over the forecast period. We also have the lowest net debt to GDP ratio among all countries in the G7. So what we've managed to do is to save our healthcare system by investing in almost $200 billion over the next 10 years. What we have managed to do is create and sustain Canada's place in the economy of tomorrow by accelerating our green transition, by showing that we are competing with the United States in order to attract investors here in Canada, while supporting the most vulnerable Canadians through this difficult time, and we've done so in an economically responsible way. Our fiscal position remains extremely strong, and the deficit continues to decrease. And I think that's a point that Canadians would find heart in, because it is a Liberal government that has had their back for the last 7.5 years, and it's also a Liberal government that is being extremely fiscally prudent right now.
Okay, Mr. Chambers, I'll let you respond to that, but I do want to ask you as well on dental care. Would a Conservative government scrap or reduce this new dental care benefit in the future?
So first on dental care, look, again, it's about prioritization. If we're going to create a program that is going to just fill the gaps, i.e. Cover people who don't have coverage today, let's have a conversation, but let's find out what else we can cut in government to pay for it. The concern that we have, or at least that I'm seeing on the ground, is I have people coming into the office suggesting or telling me that they're now not being covered under a provincial program because there's now a federal program. There's also private employers who are taking people off of their private plans because the federal government is providing coverage. Except, guess what? The federal government plan actually is not as good as the private plans that are also on the market. Now, with respect to what Canadians understand in terms of facts, over the next few years, we are going to spend $50 billion a year on interest payments on the debt. That is almost as much as we are transferring to provinces for health care. And so it's the spending that incurs those interest charges on the debt. We were told a couple years ago by the finance minister that it would be irresponsible not to spend because interest rates are so low. And now interest rates have gone up so much that we are spending almost as much on interest on the debt as we transfer to the provinces to deliver health care.
Okay, Mr. Julian, we have a couple of moments left, so I want to end with you on a kind of a broader question about affordability and really the politics of affordability and the cost of living. Now, we've already talked about what your leader is saying today, and the message from your party, from Mr. Singh, is that it's the NDP that has delivered on affordability in this budget, pressuring the government through that confidence and supply agreement. But I guess the question is this: if Liberals are presumably listening to you and implementing these policies you want, like dental care, what's the incentive for voters who support those measures to look at your party instead of the Liberals when the time comes and Canadians go to the polls?
Well, you saw the ECOS poll last week that had the Liberals at 28, the NDP at 25. What that means at a national basis is that more and more voters are turning away from the Liberal Party and turning towards the NDP. It's also the case that Conservatives are up around 30. But I'm seeing more and more people who voted Conservative in my riding saying the NDP seems to be the only party, the worker bees of Parliament, that are actually fighting hard for regular families, actually making a difference. We're not talking about speeches. We're talking about real, concrete realizations. During COVID, of course, it was the NDP that provoked a response on COVID that made such a difference for small businesses, for families, for students, for seniors, for people with disabilities. Those are all things that the NDP pressured a minority parliament to make sure that folks had the wherewithal to get through the pandemic. And now, as we're coming out of the pandemic, we are starting to put in place other things like healthcare, like the NDP grocery rebate, all of those things making a difference in people's lives. That's what people really elect parliamentarians to do. It's something that Liberals and Conservatives, I guess, have lost touch with over decades because they've been here to give speeches rather than putting in place the practical solutions that actually help people. So we're proud of our record. We're still fighting on housing. On employment insurance, it needs to be reformed so that people, if they lose their job, actually can access it. That's something that the Harper government destroyed and the Liberal government hasn't done anything to
Mr.
fix.
Julian, we are out of time, unfortunately. So we are going to have to
these are the next
leave
things
it on
we'll be
that
fighting
note for today. But I want to thank all three of you, Rachel Bendayan, Adam Chambers, and Peter Julian. Thanks to all three of you today.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Andrew.
Thank you.